Hi, I still haven't figured out how to make an intro that isn't unbelievably cringy, so I'm just going to start. Today I'm going to be taking you through some justifications for imprisonment, factoring in the ethics and aims of the system in the UK. I'm sure we all know there is a huge amount of differing opinions in relation to how ethical imprisonment is. I think these discussions can vary hugely depending on the harshness of the prison environment and regimes. To be totally honest, prison in the UK is not going to carry the worst regime or environment in comparison to some horrific prisons and mega jails in other countries. But for now, I am focusing on the UK system to create a better understanding. As we criticise policing around the world, I think it's important to take a closer look at what goes on after the initial stages of the criminal justice system. If you're interested in seeing the initial stages, take a look at my last video about the stages of the criminal justice system in the UK. So, let's begin. I'm going to start with some philosophical justifications for imprisonment, to get an idea of how the system really thinks and how it produced a public understanding that prison is good. There are several different aims for the system. Depending on the aim for each individual, the outcome may be different. These aims include punishment. A huge aspect of prison is punishment. I've said already, but I don't agree that prisons should be used to punish. I believe it should be used to reform. But punishment is much cheaper and easier for the government, so that's a huge factor. The way a prison is supposed to punish an individual is by a loss of liberty. Liberty just means a person's freedom. It can be defined as the state of being free within society from oppressive restrictions imposed by authority on one's way of life, behaviour, or political views. By locking someone up, you take away their liberty. There are some ethical factors involved with this that I will discuss further later on. The second aim is deterrence. This just means we put people in prison to deter them from committing more crimes. There's two types of deterrence that we see commonly. One is general. This is when the court sentences harder on crimes that are on the rise to deter people from committing them. For example, insanely high sentences for drug-related crimes introduced to America during the war on drugs. A person will serve 10 years for having 5 grams of methamphetamine, which disproportionately hits deprived communities most, leaving prison populations for non-violent crimes resulting in 65% of the inmates being black. I could make a whole video on racism in the criminal justice system. In fact, I could make 100 videos on it, but I'll save that for another video. Anyway, the other type of deterrence is specific. This is when you use the system to deter a single person from committing crime. For example, you could give an offender that's come in with drug-related crimes requirements with community service. So for a person with drug-related crimes, they'd have to do regular drug tests to deter them from using. To me, specific terms for deterrence are far less problematic than general ones, because decisions are made person to person and they can be very effective. For example, not allowing sex offenders to live near schools to deter them from reoffending. The next aim is incapacitation. This means to deprive somebody of their ability, making them incapable. We see incapacitation in the physical separation of offenders from society. This is furthered by not allowing inmates to have mobile phones, therefore cutting communication even more. However, many people inside UK prisons do manage to get access to mobile phones, which can sometimes allow people to continue to commit crimes in the outside world. Obviously, people have access to the phones inside, but they are monitored heavily to prevent people inside organising crime outside. Something to note about incapacitation is that it is temporary. A person is only incapacitated whilst they are in prison, and then this factor is removed when they leave. The fourth aim is denunciation, which is public disapproval or shaming of the individual. This can be seen in media coverage of crimes or when photographs of offenders are released with an accompaniment of revealing their crime. This is a modern day version of throwing rotten fruit and veg at somebody in the stop. Denunciation has been proven to not be very effective in many cases. In some, it is quite the opposite. Denunciation can be quite dangerous as some people strive to be labelled as a danger. Some school shooters, for example, people that want a gross glorification of their crimes in the media. In these cases, the attention doesn't matter if it's negative, it's still attention. But I must note that this is an extreme example of denunciation gone wrong, and I believe in freedom of media, so I have to agree with reporting on cases. Although this raises huge issues and inequalities in the way media outlets report on individuals. Many outlets tend to report more on crimes committed by people of colour, or they disproportionately mention the person's skin colour when making the report. The next aim for the system is my personal favourite, rehabilitation. Rehabilitation comes in many different forms. Some are courses to show the impact of an offender's crimes on a victim. Other forms of rehabilitation include education and drug treatment. Rehabilitation has been proven to be the most effective way of preventing reoffending. So it's not only a positive thing for the offender themselves, but also for potential victims and society. To me, rehabilitation is the most important of the 5 aims of imprisonment. I think that offenders are often demonised and people see them as their crime rather than a human being who has had a series of events that has led them to where they are in life. Often people have come from backgrounds with little educational opportunity and primarily a lack of love. I believe if prison was seen as an opportunity to better yourself, it would take away from the minority of people that see it as something that gains them street cred, and subsequently this would cost less money. That brings me to the end of the academic justifications for imprisonment. These 5 aims all have arguable reasoning behind them, but I'd like to look at the ethical factors a little closer. The first aim I discussed, a loss of liberty, has been justified by being a means of punishment for the crime committed. However, the reality is offenders often receive far greater punishment than just this. The conditions of prison are not to a standard that promotes healthy lifestyles and positive mental health or equality. The point I'm making is that when you go to prison, you don't simply lose your liberty as punishment. You're put in an overcrowded space in a tiny room to exist in, with terrible food, next to no mental health care, and on top of this, people are left in their cells for the majority of their day due to underfunding resulting in a lack of staff. Many people endure abuse, racism, and homophobia during their stay, where, might I add, they have been taken away from their families, job, and house. So, the punishment does not start and finish at a loss of liberty, it is furthered by a loss of liberty itself. I'm going to be looking into this more in my next video, which is about the prison crisis, so do watch that if you're interested in my expansion on those topics. It's crazy to think the idea is that this is the only punishment you should endure during a sentence. This brings me on to the legalities of imprisonment. The Prison Act of 1952 states that the authorities have a right to hold prisoners securely, that their treatment must be ethical and conform to human rights. The punishment prescribed is simply a loss of liberty and no other form of punishment may be administered. Their treatment must be ethical and conform to human rights. The punishment prescribed is simply a loss of liberty and no other form of punishment may be administered. Therefore, there is no real reason why prisoners shouldn't have a comfortable cell and homely items like the widely debated television. There is no real reason why they should not have access to daily showers, nutritious food, exercise, and education. There is no real reason why they should not have access to jobs, and there is no real reason why they should not be able to socialise. On that note, I'd like to add that isolation sentences are no longer allowed in the UK, and people are only supposed to be put in segregation for short periods of time to diffuse difficult situations. However, this is often not the case. I understand that it's a difficult pill to swallow to suggest that taxpayers' money should go on items such as televisions for inmates when people in general society don't always have access to those things. I think in an ideal world we would all be able to have access to such items, but a good solution would be to allow inmates to work and earn money whilst they are in jail so that they can buy these items themselves. This would also teach people how to manage money and earn an honest living if that's something that they might have struggled with in the past. The Ministry of Justice believes that rehabilitation should be the main aim. It is shown to reduce desistance. This means a reduction in crime, which equals less victims. The prison service mission statement is, our duty is to look after prisoners with humanity and to help them lead law-abiding lives in custody and on release. However, this is not always the case. Which isn't to say that it is necessarily the individual officer's fault, although sometimes it obviously is, rather than it is a fault of the system and the government. Not funding the system means that there are shortages of staff, so the staff that are there have to focus heavily on security rather than rehabilitation. As I said, I will be focusing on the prison crisis, which looks at these issues more closely in my next video, so please join me for that if you're interested. Thank you so much for listening to me blabber on. These are issues that really need more public attention and thought. As I said, we can't create change without understanding. Please like this video and subscribe if you want to see more. I'll be making more videos on this topic and other topics that interest me, so stick around for that if that's something that you're interested in. And show some love on this video, it helps apparently. Thank you. Denunciation. Denunciation. Denounce. Denunciation. Denunciation. Denounce. Denouncing. Denounce. Denunciation.